Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today is part 4, the final part of my Homefront card reviews. So Homefront is the Cards expansion that is coming out on the day that you are seeing this video. I don't know exactly what time, but if you are seeing this video, there's a pretty decent chance that the expansion has dropped, so feel free to open up Cards and start playing it if you want to, and if you don't want to, then you can head over to my Twitch a few hours after this video goes up, where I will be streaming in the afternoon some Homefront. But we have a task here today, and that is to discuss the remaining 20 or so cards, or 16 actually cards here that are left to talk about for the Homefront expansion. Actually, no, it's closer to 20. And included in that is one pretty massive, substantial change that we are going to take a look at first. So let's just jump straight into the video, starting with some changes to a much talked about card. And that is going to be research. And by research, I mean resistance. So they have a nice handy video here where Gumi talks about research. It's good. You can watch it, but we're not going to watch it here. Instead, we are going to talk about, and did I call it research again? I mean resistance. We are going to talk about resistance. So what was resistance? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of detail on this, but resistance was a card which a archetype in Cards that has been rotated out for a very long time. And basically, you would add resistance cards to your opponent's hand, and the resistance card was a 1-credit order that said choose one, deal 1 damage to your HQ, or remove the top card of your deck. So basically, you would fill your opponent's hand with these cards that they would have to spend credits and take penalties to play to fill up space in their hand to prevent them from either overdrawing or depending on like what type of things you would do, and you could like try to retreat units into their hand to destroy them if they have a full hand, or you could play like Enigma to draw a bunch of cards because their hand is full of resistances and stuff like that, and then either they take damage from the resistance cards and you use that to try to burn them down, or they remove cards from their deck and you use that to try to win in fatigue. Now, that was not a particularly fun mechanic because people did not enjoy having their hands constantly full of resistance cards and seeing their cards removed from their decks. So they rotated resistance, and they were never going to bring it back in its version, even though I don't think its old version was particularly bad in the current meta in terms of toxicity or power level, and it was kind of bad in terms of power level. I don't think it would have been particularly good. So they reworked it to something brand new, and that is what you see here. I'll zoom in so you can see these a little bit better. So the new resistance, and let's move this over here, but the new resistance is a 0-cost order that says play for free when drawn, lose 1 credit, take 1 HQ damage, pin a friendly unit, draw a card. So we'll take a look at the reworked cards, because as we saw, all the resistance cards are coming back. Well, basically all the resistance cards that have not been changed since then are coming back. And now, instead of adding them to hand, all of the resistance cards and some new resistance cards that we are getting in this set, they add resistance cards to your deck, well, to your opponent's deck. And when they draw those cards, they get played immediately. And these can be drawn on your opponent's turn. These can be drawn on your own turn. Depending on, like, there's certain cards, obviously, that can draw cards on your opponent's turn. And basically, when it gets drawn, it plays immediately, it does a couple bad things, and then you draw a card to replace it. So you still draw the same number of cards, like, from your deck. So even though your deck gets larger, it's still as if, like, the resistance cards weren't there, quote-unquote, in that they aren't going to make you die any sooner on fatigue, but they're also not going to make you die any slower on fatigue. They just sort of pop up, they do a little small thing, and then they disappear. So before we get, well, actually, I suppose we should take a look at some of the resistance cards and then talk about all of them as a whole. Because to fully understand resistance, you have to understand how you are adding these resistance cards to your deck. So the first card that we're going to look at is an actual card from the new expansion. So this resistance here is a token card. It is not in your collection. It is generated by cards. Some from the new expansion, some from the old sets. Now, Resistance Council is a card from Homefront. It is a 1-credit standard order for France that says pin target unit, deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ, add a resistance card to the enemy deck. So it does 3 different things, so it's a little hard to evaluate, but 1 credit pin target unit, not wonderful, not terrible, but like you can combine it with like surprise attacks and stuff off of the Type 94 if you're doing Japan main, but not wonderful. Deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ is abysmal. Now, obviously, Buzz Bomb is like a fairly popular card, but that's because Buzz Bomb replaces itself in your hand. Or like, you know, there's certain units that deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ, but again, those are units. This is pin 1 unit, deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ, shuffle a resistance card into their deck. And also, all of these say add resistance card to their deck, not shuffle. The effect is shuffling. Like, they are put into the deck randomly. They're not put on the bottom, they are not put on the top, they are put somewhere randomly in the middle, but they don't say shuffle so that it doesn't work with the shuffle archetype, which I understand from a balance perspective why they are doing that. I think it creates an issue of clarity on the cards and also just an issue of consistency in wording. And it just sort of begs the question of, like, was shuffle the correct way to do this if you can't print cards that should say shuffle but don't say shuffle because you don't want to give them to the shuffle deck? But that aside, this card is not that good, I don't think. I don't think adding 1 resistance to their deck is particularly useful. I don't think pinning a card or pinning a unit is particularly useful, and I don't think dealing 1 damage to the enemy HQ is particularly useful. Obviously, all 3 of these things in certain situations can be good, but I don't think you want to spend a card in your deck to do any one of these things. Maybe if Phony War was still in standard with draw 9, and you could very easily replace this in your hand, but unfortunately the value of a card needs to be, it needs to have a minimum amount of value that you are going to get just for the fact that it is in your hand. You draw that card off of a card draw, which you don't get a lot of necessarily, and you want it to do something, and this does nothing. So I think Resistance Council is actually complete garbage. Then we have the Premier BCP, which is a 3-credit, 3/5 infantry guard, limited rarity. And again, we're just like fully into the power creep. The standard size of a 2-drop is a 2/4. The standard size of a 3-drop is a 3/5, with a ton of upside because it's 3 credits for a 3/5 guard, which is already incredible. And then on top of that, it says draw a card when the enemy draws a resistance order. So you could just play this as a 3-cost 3/5 guard, and I think that's reasonable because France has the it's a 2/3 that choose 1, get 3 defense and guard, or 3 attack and blitz. So it can be a 5/3 blitzer or a 2/6 guard. That card has seen some play, and I think obviously you don't get the blitz part, but a 3/5 guard is a lot better than a 2/6 guard the majority of the time. So there's a world where you could just play this in a French control deck that is running like Defend in Depths and Call to the Colonies as healing and removal, and then you play the Premier BCP as just a guard, and then you're chilling. But obviously it's intended to be played with the resistance cards because when your opponent randomly draws a resistance card, you get to then draw off of this if it is on the board. So, you know, if you do add a resistance to their deck on turn 2, and then on your turn 3 you play Premier BCP, and then it goes to their turn 3, and then they just happen to draw the resistance card, like 1 in 30 or whatever, then you get a free card draw on top of them having the resistance trigger. And that is really good if it works. The problem is it does not work consistently, but again, this is a card that is just pretty good on its own, so you'll probably play it in the resistance decks because it's good. Then we get to the 27th DIA, or the 27th, Again, it's been a while since I was in French class. But the 27th DIA, it is a 4 credit 4/6 infantry with guard special rarity, and again, 2 credit 2/4 standard, 3 credit 3/5 standard, 4 credit 4/6 is the new standard with additional upside. It also has Alpine. This is the only French Alpine card. The Alpine on this is almost certainly doesn't matter 99% of the time, but it has Alpine on it. So hey, why not? Means it does not die to. No, actually, it still dies to because Alpine's not a combat keyword. Anyways, yeah, it's a 4 credit 4/6 guard, and that is not bad. Again, Seaforth was the best guard in the entire game for years until it got rotated as a 4 credit 4/7 guard only on your opponent's turn. This is you drop 1 health for the permanent 4 attack, and also, it deals 2 damage to the enemy HQ when the enemy draws a resistance order. So again, it is punishing the enemy if these units are if this unit is on the board, and they draw a resistance card. The effect on this one is substantially worse than the effect on the Premier BCP. However, again, there's a world where you just play this in a French control deck because a 4 credit 4/6 guard is really good. And there's a chance you play this in the resistance deck because a 4 credit 4/6 guard that sometimes deals damage to the enemy HQ is really good. Then we take a look at the reworked cards. So all of these cards are not in Homefront, but you will find them in Homefront packs if you do not currently have them in your collection. But if you already have them in your collection, then you don't have to worry, because these cards all came out in the first ever expansion for Cards Allegiance, and they're all being reworked and brought out of reserved for this set. So Vive la Resistance is now 2 credits, add 2 resistance cards to the enemy deck, draw a card. So 2 credits draw a card is bad, but 2 credits draw a card, shuffle 2 resistance cards into their deck is a pretty. It's the most effective way to add resistance cards to your deck, or to your opponent's deck, outside of Liberation. And Liberation is a special, so if your deck is revolving around adding a bunch of resistance cards to their deck, you probably want to run 4 copies of La Resistance because it's just a very, very good way to add a lot of resistance cards to their deck. Then we have Arming the Resistance, which is 4 credits, deal 5 damage to a target unit, so slightly below rate for just a damage order. Then it says add a resistance card to the enemy deck for each excess damage. So theoretically, you could hit a cavalry regiment and add 4 resistance cards to their deck. That doesn't seem particularly useful. Or you could just hit something with 5 health and you add no resistance cards to their deck. But that doesn't seem particularly useful. Neither of the situations seem awful, but this is the one where I feel like it is the worst out of the cards that out of the reworks. I mean, I suppose maybe you just play it because it's removal that sometimes can be used to just add a bunch of resistance cards, or it's removal that sometimes adds 1 or 2 resistance cards. So maybe it's worth just playing, depending on what your main nation you're playing this in. If they lack removal, maybe you run Arming the Resistance, but in general, I think this is the weakest of these 4 cards here. Then we have Expeditionary Corps, which is a 2 credit 2/3 guard. They really resisted making it a 2/4, to be completely honest with you. I was half expected based on everything else we've seen from this expansion. But it has deployment, add a resistance to the enemy deck. So this is a single resistance on a 2 credit 2/3 guard. This is pretty solid. I don't know if you run 4 of them, but you certainly probably run 2 or 3 of them if you're playing a resistance deck. And then we have Liberation, which is by far the best resistance card. It is a 3 credit, add 3 resistance to the enemy deck. Your HQ gains a 6 defense. So it's like Fortification, but you lose 1 health on the heal and instead add 3 resistance to their deck, which is absolutely a good payoff if you are playing any type of resistance deck. And even if you're not playing a resistance deck, 1 health is probably worth your opponent on average drawing 1 resistance card in the next 10 turns, which is in the next 10 cards, which is probably about right if you play that on turn 3. So all in all, Liberation, very, very good. Vive la Resistance, probably a card that you're going to play if you're making a resistance deck. Expeditionary Corps, probably a card you're going to play if you're making a resistance deck. I mean, the resistance, a little on the mid-side. The two units, both fairly good, just because of their bodies, more so than their effects. Resistance Council, utterly unplayable. And the resistance token itself, let's talk about it. So, they somehow made resistance more toxic, in my honest opinion, because resistance in its version that existed before now, and this reworks the mechanic entirely, so you can't play with old resistance in Classic anymore, which is an entire other conversation. But why was resistance hated and toxic in the past? It was hated and toxic in the past because it would fill up your hand, which is just a frustrating feeling where you have to spend credits on playing cards your opponent added to your hand rather than cards that are in your deck. But, that's not like it wasn't a fundamentally overpowered mechanic, and it was not a random mechanic in any way. It was just a mechanic that some players did not find fun to play against. Most players did not find fun to play against. The new resistance cards, it shuffles them into your deck, so you don't get them stuck in your hand. You still draw the same number of cards. You still have access to your deck in the same way. But man, is it gonna suck to draw a resistance card. Like, if you, for example, are like, I need to play Strategic Focus on turn 7 to clear their board, and I have Strategic Focus in hand, and I'm setting up my board to play Strategic Focus on turn 7. I'm setting up everything. I'm letting them overextend. I'm not committing too many of my own units on board because I'm set up to do this turn 7 Strategic Focus, and then on turn 7, you start your turn, and you draw a resistance card, which loses you 1 credit, so you only have 6 credits. Now you can't play Strategic Focus, so you can't clear the board, so you just absolutely trolled by letting them overextend onto the board and not putting up your own guards and stuff. So now you can't clear the board, and now you lose because of that, because you hit the 1 in 20 resistance card on that specific turn. Or you have lethal on board, but they 1 in 5 pin your biggest unit, so you don't kill them that turn, and then they finish you off the next turn. Or you're at 1 health, and your opponent is dead on board no matter what they pin, and you draw a resistance card, and it deals the 1 damage to you, and you die. Or maybe your opponent, shuffles 2 resistance cards into your deck on turn 2, and you're an aggro deck, and you're like, okay, that's fine. And then on your turn 2, you draw both of the resistance cards, so you just don't get to play anything on turn 2 as an aggro deck, which just puts you so far behind against a control deck, because then on turn 3, they play a 3/5 guard, that you just lose. Now, all of these situations are not particularly likely, but that is my issue with this rework of resistance, is it's just very, very high RNG. There's RNG of when you draw the resistance, and there is RNG when, after you do draw it, there's RNG as to what unit it pins. And it's something that neither player can play around. Neither player knows when it's going to show up. And that's not particularly fun. Old resistance was not fun, but at least both players very much saw what was happening. You knew what cards they had access to, you knew what they did. When they added cards to your hand, they were in your hand, and you just played them to get them out of your hand, but there was no RNG to it. Both players were able to interact with it in the ways that you interact with those cards. This one is completely random for both players, which means as the person putting resistances into your opponent's deck, you play based on percentages as to when they are going to draw them and what the most likely outcome is. But at the end of the day, it's sometimes they're just never going to draw their resistance cards, or sometimes they're going to draw them all immediately in a way that isn't actually helpful for you. And vice versa, you might just draw resistance. They shuffle 1 resistance card into your deck, but then you draw it on the worst possible turn and get the worst possible pin, and it completely changes the game. So yeah, I am not a fan of the rework. In terms of the actual archetype, is resistance going to be that good? I don't think so. I think it's probably a package that you can play, but I don't think it's going to be better than Tier 2 at the moment. Liberation's a very good card, especially with the lack of healing going on. And the guards are just good, but I don't think adding resistance cards to your it's a good thing that you can't add that many, because with how few you can add at the moment, it doesn't feel like you're ever going to get to the point where it's a good deck where you're consistently having your opponent draw resistances, and you're consistently drawing or triggering your guards and whatnot. So that's just a good thing that you can't consistently have that happen. but that also just creates, like, you somehow made an iconic archetype and turned it into a tier 2 at best casino deck. And that's frustrating as somebody who loved old Resistance, as well as somebody who does not enjoy playing with or against casino decks particularly. Um, yeah, that's a downright shame. Now, another important thing to note about the Resistance is this is the first time we have had play when drawn in cards. We've had shown when drawn in the last expansion, Naval Warfare, and that just showed your opponent do like the card and it did something, but the card then went to your hand. This is show when drawn, or sorry, play when drawn on an order, and it has some interesting interactions, and by interesting I mean kind of stupid. So it counts as play in an order, and now it says play for free when drawn, which is important because it means if you draw, like if you have Blackwatch on the board, and then you add a resistance card to their deck, and then they draw the resistance card, the order will cost 2, but it says play for free, so they don't lose any additional credits. However, the biggest interaction, obviously there's some other ones, like the Sakura Regiment that deals 1 damage to them when they play an order. This will deal 1 damage to them because they are playing an order. Same with the Utsunomiya. But the stupidest one is the 169th Grenadiers, the elite that Germany got, the 5 credit 5/6 that when they play an order, they discard a card. So if you play, say on turn 2 you do Vive la Resistance, turn 3 Liberation, turn 4, I don't know, you arming the Resistance, or you play another Vive la Resistance or something like that. And then on turn 5 you play down the 169th Grenadiers, you end your turn, and then it goes over to your opponent's turn. And then they have like what? Like a 1 in 5 to draw a Resistance, something like that. Well, and now you can add discard a card in hand to that. But then if that Resistance card draws a second Resistance card, which isn't particularly likely, but if they do it, they now discard 2 cards on top of losing 2 credits and taking 2 damage and pinning 2 units on board, which means they probably can't remove your 169th, which means that you can then get a second turn of them potentially drawing resistance cards. And that's really stupid, because people are going to try that, and it's going to happen to you on ladder. It's going to happen to me on ladder, you better believe it. And it's going to be very frustrating when it happens. And yeah, I don't know, you somehow like printed a card that makes the casino deck even more casino-y. But that is everything that I have to say about the resistance cards. So let's go back to the other cards here that we have to talk about, the non-French cards. And starting off strong, we have the remaining elites for each of the 5 main nations. And oh boy, are some of these insane. So first off, we have Way of Subjects, which is a 2-credit Japanese elite order that says all Japanese cards in your deck get bond, and your HQ gets +1 defense when you play this card. So again, I will reiterate, in the same way that how I feel about the Victory Gardens. I'm not a fan of cards that if you play it, like if you get it in your opening hand and you play it on curve, give you infinitely more value than if you draw it as the last card of your deck. Now, obviously, there's some cards that are just going to be bad as the last card of your deck, and there's some cards that are going to be, like, good, better on curve. But, like, for example, something like Front Formation. It's turn 9, you have a pretty high chance of getting it by that point, and, like, it's your win condition if you have it, and if you see that you don't have it, you play to a different win condition. Whereas, and like obviously, like 2-drops are best played on turn 2. It's going to have the most impact if you draw it on turn 2. That it's just playing units on curve. But something like this, where it's like give all units in your deck, or all cards in your deck, an effect, and you play that on turn 2 versus on turn like 20, suddenly you are triggering that effect on like 20 fewer cards, and that's a huge difference. Now, let's talk about the actual effect, because from a design perspective, I'm not a big fan of these types of cards, but let's talk about the actual effect on the card. And that is, give all of your cards bond, and your HQ gets +1 defense when you play this card. So, if you disable bond on everything, if you always have a Japanese unit on board and your bonds never trigger, this is insane. +1 defense every time you play a card, a Japanese card, is an incredible card to be get in a like Japanese control deck, or a Japanese combo deck, or not aggro, but basically like control or combo, or potentially even in mid range, depending on what the meta looks like. You might need to try to get as much heal as possible. The issue is that's not how that works. You're not guaranteed to always have a Japanese unit on board, especially because if your opponent sees you play Way of the Subjects, they will now probably remove your Japanese units before anything else. Because they're like, I can hit you for 4 damage, or I can kill your 1-drop. I will kill your 1-drop because now you take fatigue damage every card you play next turn. So yeah, basically just playing this card is an incredible risk, because if you can't disable the bond consistently, you are going to die very, very, very quickly if all of your cards have bond. And it doesn't matter if every card you play heals you 1 if it's drawing you into 5 and then 6 and then 7 fatigue. You are going to die incredibly quickly. So in short, I think this card is awful. I don't think the risk is worth the reward, especially based on the other cards we have seen for Japan Control. They can just simply play their units that deal damage to the enemy HQ and heal your HQ, and not rely on Way of Subjects at all. This is an absolutely, utterly terrible card. However, it's a very fun, terrible card, unlike the Tide Turns, which is a boring, terrible card. So yeah, if you open this in your pack, apologies, but also maybe you can try to play like a fun Way of Subjects deck, and see how quickly you kill yourself. Moving on, we have Thunderbolt, which is a 3-credit 3/5 USA Elite, and once again, we are 3-credit 3/5 is the new standard cost of a card, apparently. And then on top of a 3-credit 3/5 body, infantry, which is good, we have Smokescreen and Shock, which is insane. Also 2 combat keywords, could be relevant, but Smokescreen and Shock, which is insane, and also, there's no bond on this for some reason, so it's just power creep. And then it has deployment, draw 2 cards, choose a card in your hand to put on top of your deck. So it's even crazier. So it's a 3-credit 3/5 Smokescreen Shock deployment, draw a card with upside. Like, with the additional upside, if you get to see 2 cards, you could put the worst card in your hand, you get 2 cards deeper if you're fishing for something. There's obviously the show when drawn cards. You can put, like, the Alabama or the Coronado or whatever else on top of your deck with this. This is a auto-include in every single USA deck. And, like, on the one hand, the power level of this card is obscene, and I am not a fan of just how stupidly powerful this card is. Like, I'm not a fan of just how incredibly power corrupt this card is. On the other hand, to be fair, USA has lacked an auto-include elite compared to other nations for a long time, and this is definitely an auto-include elite. So, is it stupid? Yes. Do I hate the design philosophy? Yes. Do I want this card to be nerfed? Yes. If any nation had to get it, is USA the best possible situation, or the best possible nation to receive a card like this? Also, yes. So yeah, if you open Thunderbolt, you are going to be very, very happy, because there's not a USA main deck that you are going to build that does not want this card in the deck as the first card in the deck. Then we get to the Soviet Elite, which is a 2-cost infantry with 2 operation costs, so that's interesting. 2 cost, 2 operation cost. It's a 5/2, because stats don't mean anything anymore. And it has Blitz, it has Bond, it has Smokescreen, so it has 2 combat keywords. And you can trade it off immediately for 4 credits. You play it for 2 and you attack for 2. And at 2 health, it's going to be relatively easy to trade off. And at 5 attack, you are going to be able to trade it off into something relatively big in the front line fairly easily. And you want to trade it off because its destruction is draw a card. Your HQ gains defense equals to its cost. So you draw a random card in your deck. Completely random card. Could it be a sickle? Could it be front formation? You draw a random card, and then you gain HQ equal to its cost. Now, the HQ you gain is going to give your opponent a hint as to what card you might have drawn, which is an interesting space where your opponent has limited information on as to what you possibly drew. So, on the one hand, that's good. On the other hand, I do think the power level of this card is too high. Um, just because, it's destruction draw a card on like a 5-2 blitz smokescreen is good. It has a bond, but like Soviets don't have a lot of bonds. So like if you're playing this in Soviet control, you maybe have like 2 bond cards in your deck. So even if you aren't disabling them, you're not taking that much fatigue damage. And then the destruction heals you, and it heals you a random amount, which is also like, again, I'm not a big fan of random when it comes to healing because like if you're playing against a burn deck and you heal for 9, um, it's going to be a much better time winning off that random 1 in 30 hit the front formation than if you heal 1 off the sickle, which is a much more likely number to happen than the 9. It's also just weird from a design perspective because this is a destruction unit, which, as we saw, the Motherland Calls, the other Soviet elite that pulls a Soviet destruction unit from your deck and then triggers the destruction effect at the end of turn. You probably don't want it to hit Gatchina. It's like fine if it hits Gatchina, because Gatchina is just an incredible card. So it's like 3 credits to draw and play Gatchina, which is fine. But like, if you're playing Motherland Calls, it's probably because you want to be playing it with the like stupid combo. But maybe there's just enough destruction effects that you play Motherland Calls without the IS2, and you just play it because on average it's just slightly good. If you just play it with like Yak 9, 97th, Gatchina, and then yeah, that's basically it. So you don't have any drastic high rolls, but you just play it as like a slightly optimal card. That's the ideal world, but yeah, Gatchina, frustrating card, but not as powerful as the Thunderbolt. Let's move on to the German Elite, the last one we have to look at, and this one has had a lot of conversation sparked about it because it is very, very interesting. So, the German Elite is Front and Homeland. It is a 4-credit order that says, draw from your deck on turn 4. And this is one of the most interesting lines of text we have ever seen in Cards. We have never had anything remotely close to this. So, it tutors itself from your deck on turn 4. So you have access to this on turn 4 in 100% of games. Virtually 100% of games. You could draw this before turn 4 and then have it discarded, in theory. But if you put this in your deck, you basically have access to this on turn 4 100% of the time. And that's very interesting for an elite, especially because the rest of the text is reduce the cost of German cards with odd cost in your deck by 1. So it makes all odd cost cards in your deck cost 1 less, which is credit ramping effectively when you draw those cards, but also it makes all of them even, so that when you play something like a Jet Prototype, you now know that 100% of your deck is even cost. But now you are able to run odd cost cards in your deck at the start of the game because you know on turn 4 you will make them all even 100% of the time. So this opens up some interesting design space for the odd even deck, where you are able to run odd cost cards, but at the penalty of saying that you are going to take a 4-credit tempo loss on turn 4. And you don't often want to take a 4-credit tempo loss on turn 4, especially because ramp is good. If you play like turn 4 War Bonds, turn 5 War Bonds, you're generally happy about that, but that's because War Bonds draws you a card. So I guess the more comparable one would be Hour of Need, which is the 4-cost gain 2 credits, so it's like War Bonds, but you don't draw the card. It's rotated now, but it used to see a lot of play. So compare that to Hour of Need. Hour of Need is also 4 credits don't do anything, and ideally you play it on turn 4. But Hour of Need then gives you 2 additional credits to spend on what is in your hand and on your board next turn. Whereas Front and Homeland gives you 1 additional credit to spend effectively by you have to spend 1 less credit when playing potential cards you might draw from your deck. So it is much, 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 much worse than Ramp if you just play it on turn 4 in like an even deck where you're just trying to like draw cards and play cards like sort of 1 or 2 at a time. It is much worse in that situation. However, again, it makes all of your deck even, so maybe that's still worth the payoff of now being able to play odd cards and even. And then you just set them all to 4. Also, this draws itself on turn 4, so this is just a free draw. It's not on turn 4, the card you draw naturally is Front and Homeland. It's on turn 4, you draw Front and Homeland and your card that you draw naturally. So if you don't draw it before then, which is possible, you can find this in your mulligan, you can draw this on turn 3. But that means that, like, in 75% of the games, it's also not even going to cost you a card. It's just going to cost you the 4 credits on that turn. This is a very interesting card that obviously is going to be good in the even decks. I don't think this is going to make the even decks good, though. But where a lot of the conversation around this card has been focused is not actually on the even decks, it's on Heinz. Because if you look at Heinz and the way Heinz typically works, you run a whole lot of 1-cost tanks, and then there's a few very powerful 3-cost tanks that you run just because they're powerful. And then there is Blitzkrieg as your win condition, which also costs 3. So if you look at a Heinz deck, it's going to probably be like 30 to 32 odd cards. Which means Front and Homeland is effectively reducing the cost of like 80% of your deck by 1. Now, you're doing that on turn 4, and if you're playing Heinz, you're playing an aggro deck, and you don't want to do turn 4 pass in an aggro deck, effectively. But if you then play something like, say, an Enigma, where you draw a lot of cards at once, if you play Enigma after playing Front and Homeland, and say you draw 4 cards, Front and Homeland can draw you, and you played Front and Homeland, and you play Enigma, so you draw 4 cards, and you draw 3 1-cost tanks and a Blitzkrieg. All of those 1-cost tanks cost 0 now, and the Blitzkrieg costs 2. And that's crazy. Like, if you draw a Panzer A, Greif, Blitzkrieg, for 2 credits, you can hit your opponent for 8. Now, obviously, that's like a dream scenario. But it is a very interesting card to play in Heinz. It also makes the 38T much more tolerable. So the 38T is a 3-credit, 2/3 tank deployment draw card. It's been played in Heinz before, but just because you need the card draw, you want the cycle, but it just feels really slow. Having all of your 38Ts cost 2, pretty good. Buzz Bomb goes from 1 to 0. So Buzz Bomb is literally just 0 credits, deal a damage, draw a card. It lets you put in draw into Heinz with very little cost. This is also draw effectively, and like Heinz is a deck where you can pretty reasonably keep most of the cards in your opening hand, because most of the cards in your deck are 1-drops. So that even further reduces the odds of drawing this early, which increases the total draw on average of your deck. So yeah, suddenly Front and Homeland on turn 4, and then on turn 5 you do like 2-credit 38T into 2-credit 38T into 0-credit Buzz Bomb into 0-credit Jaeger Regiment, make a trade, draw a card off that, 0-credit Buzz Bomb, and then, like, suddenly you're cooking. Suddenly you're just, like, playing, like, 5, 6, 7 cards a turn. Now, obviously, maybe that's Disneyland. We'll have to check it out. It's very difficult to say beforehand, but I do think Front and Homeland is probably going to be the best way to build Heinz. If that is how good Heinz is going to be, it's going to be somewhat difficult to tell. But it seems very, very powerful in a Heinz deck that is built to a certain degree around it. Well, it's also very powerful in an even deck, and then obviously you can just play this into any German deck if you build your deck around it to a certain capacity. And that's very, very fun. It's an even card that actually gives you more value the more odd cards you have in the deck, which is just a new take on the even deck. I'm very, very happy about this card. It is very, very fun. I'm going to be playing with Front and Homeland a lot, and it makes me sad that the other 3 elites that we had released at the same time is like absolute trash. The most insane auto-include we've seen in a while, and a auto-include card that is, again, fairly random. But we have one last nation left, and that is Britain. Now, we've already seen the British auto-include, the Mustang. What is the last elite Britain is getting? Well, Britain is getting National Service, not to be confused with National Fire Service, just National Service, drop the fire. It's a 5-credit order, and it has some of the most confusing text I've ever seen in the game. And by confusing, I just mean like poorly worded. I mean, so let's read the text. The text is, for each British card in your deck, give it +2 defense if a unit, otherwise, reduce the cost by 1. Why is the word for here? For each unit in your deck. For each British card in your deck. That is just not the proper way to word this, but wording aside, what does this card actually do? So for 5 credits, it gives all British units in your deck +2 defense permanently. So when you play it, it will come down with +2 defense. And it also reduces the cost of all orders in your deck by 1. So pretty clearly, this is an insane card. Now, you have to eat a 5-credit tempo loss immediately to not do anything. You play National Service, and it does nothing on the turn you play it. And it's probably going to do very little on the following turn. Because it's going to take a little bit of time to start drawing a lot of orders and to start playing out a lot of units. Now, obviously, you could actually play this in something like Brit Air, which is not the first place people are probably thinking when they're looking at this card. But you could play this in Brit Air. And follow me out on this. You're playing Brit Air, you're doing the regular Swordfish, Gladiator, Cass, Opener, Gambit, just try to get control of the board as early as possible. And if you do get control of the board, you just play whatever else is in your hand and you snowball out and you win. But around turn 5 is where most decks are going to have access to their big tempo swing cards. Their crossfires, their whatever, like single target removals, their retreats, their like big units that your planes are absolutely useless against, whatever it is. Turn 5 comes down, and then you play National Service. And now suddenly, all of your 1/3 planes are 1/5 planes. All of your close air supports cost 0. All of your convoys cost 2, or your the new 2K draw 2 bond costs 1. Is that not pretty good? Seems pretty good to me. It seems like you just put National Service into basically any British deck. Probably not the like aggro bond deck, which is funny because that's like the hardest British deck push to this expansion. Just because I feel like it's too slow in that deck. Like you probably want to be winning around turn 5, turn 6, maybe not quite winning, but like in a spot where you're going to just win on board in the next turn or two around that time. And I'm just not convinced that you ever want to eat the tempo hit on this. You'd just rather play like a 5-cost unit than National Service. But if you're playing any type of control deck, absolutely you want this card in your deck because suddenly all of your guards have +2 defense and all of your board clears cost 1 less. And yeah, you can. This is sort of big stocks coming back for Rule Britannia. Hope you guys were invested in Rule Britannia stocks, because Rule Britannia gives all your British units +2 defense and then sets attack equal to defense. This gives them all an additional +2 defense. Suddenly, that's looking pretty decent as a win condition if you're playing a unit-heavy British deck. But maybe you're not playing a unit-heavy British deck. Maybe you're playing an order-heavy British deck, and in that case, you don't run Rule Britannia, obviously, but you absolutely run National Service because it reduces the cost of most of the cards in your deck by 1, and that's insane. This is just an absolutely insane card. And once again, this is a card which I am very frustrated with, because if you play this on turn 5, you get an incredible amount of value out of it, and if you draw it on turn 12, you get next to nothing out of it. And that is not particularly fun. And unlike the Japanese card that we looked at, it's not abysmally terrible, it's incredibly good. So that means this is going to be played in Tier 1 decks. People are going to be playing this card at the World Championship in a month, and the person who wins is going to be, the person who wins the World Championship has a high likelihood of being the person who draws National Service on turn 5 the most. And that is not a fun way to play card games, and that's just my perspective. It's a fun card to play with, and I'm certainly going to be playing with it, but from a purely design perspective, I'm not a fan of this type of card. Moving on, though, we still have another 10 or 11 cards to get through, so let's keep it going. We have a Volunteer Corps for Japan. It is a 1-credit order with Bond, And it says remove a unit from the battlefield until the end of turn. So this can be 1 credit to remove the enemy guard unit to go face for your aggro stuff. It can be 1 credit, remove your own unit, and then it returns with like fully repaired or unsuppressed. You can use this on your opponent's unit as a form of suppressed, where like you reset its stats if it got a buff of some sort. So it's a fairly versatile card. I'm just not convinced that you're going to play it because it's an order that doesn't fundamentally have a lot of value. You're able to get good value out of it, but you're also able to have this card not really do anything. And if you're playing Japan, you typically want all of your cards to do something. So I'm not too hot on this card. I think you're just going to keep playing the Type 94 TK early and surprise attacking your opponent's cards and stuff like that. But again, if the Dornier, the German card that when something gets removed, gain 2 credits, draw a card, those 2 cards are pretty good together, and if you trigger Dornier by removing itself, then suddenly you can have quite the engine going here with an additional 4 ways to remove stuff, but otherwise, this is a pretty whatever card. Then we have a 3 credit Japanese order, limited rarity, with Bond, and it says remove a unit from the battlefield. At the start of your next turn, return it to hand. So this is a very interesting one. Obviously, this one is much more aggressive in its use case, because the Volunteer Corps, you could easily play this on your own unit or your opponent's unit, because you can like attack with your own unit, and then you Volunteer Corps it, and then it returns at the end of your turn with all of its health back, or whatever. Very easily you can play this on your own unit. Drive into the Sea is much harder to play on your own unit, because it's at the start of your next turn, return it to your hand, is pretty bad. So, some bright sides, it survives, it is like in the ether for your entire opponent's turn. So if you play something with like an incredible deployment effect, you get the deployment effect, or it's like a blitz thing, you hit them with the blitz thing, or whatever it is, and then you drive into the sea. They can't remove it, they can't discard it, they can't interact with it in any way, and then at the start of your next turn, it goes back to your hand and you can play it again. Unfortunately, there's not really any deployment effects that come to mind that you would want to use this with, so most of the time you're going to be playing this on your opponent's unit, where you remove their unit, and then it's gone on your turn, it's still gone on their turn, and then on your turn again, it's still gone because it's now in their hand rather than on the board. So this is a very effective way of getting through guards. So it effectively removes a guard for 2 whole turns, or any type of unit for 2 whole turns. And that is a lot more tempting. Now, obviously, that is 3 credits, and it has Bond. So there's definitely a something you are paying for this card, but that is something you will consider. Now, it is going up against the spots of Kyoto Regiment, which did eat the nerf, and it's going up against like Command Failure, which is a bit more niche, and depends a lot on what type of units are in the meta. But it's sort of this category of thing where it's like removing something, or at the very least temporarily removing something that is problematic for a tempo deck. You could play this in a control deck, in theory, just because it does deal with a very terrifying unit for a fairly lengthy amount of time, so that can be something that is useful against control just as much as against aggro. However, again, 3 credits to not permanently remove something, and it has Bond. I think that's a little bit of a harder ask for a control deck, just because you do have like a plethora of other options for removal. Because you're less sort of fixated on what type of things you're going to be removing. So I don't think that this card is going to be excellent, but I think this card is good, and very well you might see like some people play like 1 of or 2 of in a variety of decks. But so I'm not going to be surprised if this card gets played at some point in the World Championship, but I don't think you're going to see like this as like a 3 of in every Japan deck or anything crazy like that. It's just an interesting tech card. Then we have the IJN Shirakumo, which is a Navy card, as the IJN would suggest. It is a 2 credit Japanese order, standard rarity, pin target unit. If it is already pinned, remove it instead. Your HQ gets +2 defense. So this card is pretty nutty. So let's talk about it. Surprise Attack is a 1 credit order, pin target unit. If it's already pinned, destroy it. This is remove it, and that is removed permanently. that is not removed until end of turn. That's not removed until start of next turn. That's not removed until end of next turn or whatever. That is permanently removed, so it is effectively suppress and then destroy, so you get around destruction effects. And also you gain 2 defense. And this is the IJN Shirakumo. And obviously, the other IJN card that sees a lot of play is IJN Makura, which is pin a unit. And then there's also the Type 94s for surprise attack. So this is a very powerful tool for removal and heal in a Japan deck that is running a lot of pin, as well as a lot of Navy. Now, obviously, you don't have to be running Navy. You do kind of have to be running a lot of pin to want to play this card, but you don't have to be Navy. But absolutely, you could run this in a Navy deck. So yeah, this is sort of just an interesting thing. We've obviously seen Japan control is being pushed somewhat and a viable possibility. And up until now, I had not really been looking at Japan control as like doing anything much with pin. But this definitely makes you consider: do I want to run for Makura and for Shirakumo and 3 Type 94 early, because why not? And then just have this ability to like fairly versatilely remove my opponent's units while getting a bit of heal in, and then maybe you like run like a Gifu or 2 to get an extra little bit of draw off some Navy synergy, stuff like that. A lot of interesting possibilities. I'm a fan of this type of card where it's in a certain deck it can be very powerful, but it's not like fundamentally overpowered or like an auto-include into anything. And it also pushes decks into different directions that they otherwise wouldn't go in. So this is a very well-designed card that's going to be pretty fun, and I'm excited to try it out. But I do see that this card could have the risk of just sort of falling by the wayside and being a card nobody thinks about in like 6 months, 12 months. Just because like it might be that like, you know, you can't consistently pin stuff, or you don't want to do 2 cards to pin stuff and remove it. And like the +2 HQ defense maybe is just not worth it, or like the fact that this card on its own isn't really doing a whole lot makes you not able to run it if Japanese control isn't able to fit in as much card draw. There's a lot of world situations where you might not end up seeing this card a lot, but I'm definitely going to try it a lot. Then we have, sort of continuing on with the Japanese units, we have or Japanese cards, we have Sapporo Regiment, which is a 3-credit, 3/3 infantry, standard rarity. It's been a while since I feel like I've seen a reasonably statted unit. And Sapporo Regiment has the text, gains +1/+1 and a random combat keyword when an undestroyed unit leaves the battlefield. So again, this undestroyed unit leaves the battlefield means if something gets retreated, if something gets returned to hand, if something gets temporarily removed, or if something gets permanently removed, all of these count as leaving the battlefield. Also, like niche stuff like Salamander counts as leaving the battlefield. So okay, so now that we understand how that works, this card gets +1/+1 and a random keyword. So, okay, this guy starts to grow a bit if you remove a lot of stuff. I just don't see the remove a lot of stuff. I don't think it has, like, a win con, necessarily. So I don't think that you're going to be playing this particularly, unless the Dornier engine works. If the Dornier engine works, this card is going to be insane. If the Dornier engine, or not insane, that deck is going to be worth playing, and this card is going to be worth playing in that deck. Definitely don't want to be hyperbolic. Even if the Dornier engine works, it's what are you using the engine for? I don't really know. You could use it for this. The issue I see with this is the random combat keyword is just not that good of an effect. And +1/+1 is good, but it's still like a little slow. And like if it really gets out of hand, your opponent can just suppress it back to a 3/3. It just takes a while for this to get going, I feel like. So if you want this to be a very big threat, it takes a lot of turns for that to work and a lot of cards for that to work. And if you just simply want to play this on curve as like an on curve dude, you kind of have to be removing stuff on curve, but most of the removal stuff doesn't draw to replace it. And I don't know. This just seems like a mediocre card for a mediocre archetype that I don't think is going to see any play. Moving on to Soviets, we have the 199th Rifle Regiment. It is a 2-cost, 2/2 infantry, limited rarity. It has Bond, Smokescreen, and Shock, so 2 combat keywords, and Bond. And it has the passive effect when it gets +1/+1 when you deploy or add a British or US unit. So yeah, this card is pretty abysmal. I don't think I really need to explain why, but just in case I do, a 2-credit 2/2 shock unit is bad. A 2-credit 2/2 shock unit with smokescreen to protect it to guarantee that it gets the shock attack off is fine at like a low rank. It has bond, which it probably didn't need bond, so that's bad. And then obviously you want to play this in a British deck or a US deck, like main or ally with Soviets. Um, and then you do that, and then like you play this on 2, and then on turn 3 you play like a British unit or a US unit, and it's now a 3/3 shock, and like that's fine. But just what Soviet US or US Soviet or Soviet Brit or Brit Soviet deck is going to exist that wants to run this card at the bond cost? I just don't really see the vision for this card at all. Um, Honestly, like the best thing for this is you play this on 2, and then on turn 3 you play the +2/+2 to a unit with 2 combat keywords to make a 4/4 shock. Um, but then like you hit their 2-drop for free, and then you just have a 4/4 that you spent 2 cards and took damage to get. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see the vision. Moving on, we have Rationing, which is a USA 2-cost standard order that says choose one, and the last choose one card we saw from this set was awful, so maybe this one can do better. It says choose one, remove bond from cards in your hand, or give your HQ for defense. So let's look at the first part. Remove bond from all cards in your hand. Obviously, this is a good way to effectively negate taking a lot of damage from playing a lot of bond cards in a US main or US ally deck. I feel like US doesn't really have many good bond cards, just going off of memory. So probably US ally. Are you willing to spend 2 credits of tempo loss and a card to prevent the cards in your hand from dealing damage to you? Certainly not. Like you could use this with the Japanese elite that gives everything bond, and then you like play a rationing to remove bond from everything in your hand, so then they just heal you, but that's bad. So the remove bond from cards in your hand is just a not particularly good effect. It's like super niche. If the other choose one effect is worth playing the card, then like maybe there's niche situations where you want to remove bond from cards in your hand. But the other one is gain 4 defense. And 2 credits gain 4 defense is not great. Like, if you compare it to comparable things, like naval powers, 1 credit, gain 3 defense, but also you pin something. Fortification is 1 credit more, but you get +3 defense. Yeah, it's just really below rate, which is odd because almost everything in this expansion is above rate. And also, this is a standard card. Which like, I guess actually standard makes it more sense for why it would be below rate, but like, I don't know. The one thing that it has going for it is that it's a US card, and US does not typically have access to healing particularly easily. Like, there's certainly US decks where I have played We Can Do It exclusively for the healers. That's 5 credits, gain 3. Now, obviously, it does other stuff, but I have played decks with We Can Do It for healing. So, like, dude, I'm not going to say this card's never going to see play. There very well might be some US decks that like run 2 rationings for just like a little bit of extra healing as a 2-credit heal 4. But I'm not holding my breath on that. You'd probably just rather pick like Italian ally or British ally or now French ally, or I guess always French ally would call it the colonies. But like I feel like you just pick, if the health is an issue, you pick a nation that's going to provide you health, because that's one of the drawbacks of playing US. You'd rather do that than not do that and then be forced to play a really suboptimal card like rationing to get your healing in. Then, keeping on with the US cards, we have the 41st Infantry Regiment. It is a 4-cost 3/4 infantry with limited rarity. And I said at the end of the last video that we're going to get a whole set of these. Each nation is going to get this deployment develop one of 3 cards from that nation from the base set. And this is the American version, so it has Blitz and Bond. And it has deployment develop either a Death from Above, a Unity is Strength, or a We Can Do It. So, how good is this card? Well, the same issue. It's a lot better than the Soviet one that we looked at, because that was 6 cost 5/6 ambush bond. This is 4 cost 3/4 blitz bond. So obviously it's a lot better. Just as a body. Now, the quality of cards that you can pick off of it are also higher than the quality of cards that you could have picked off the Soviet one. So that's better. And there's not really much overlap here. Like, if your opponent has a single big threat, you pick the DFA, you use it to kill the big threat. If you are playing a sort of infantry-heavy deck, you pick the Unity of Strength, probably fairly regularly. But I imagine that that's going to be the one that you don't pick. That one's going to get picked the least, and then you pick We Can Do It if you have units on board, or you need healing, or you need card draw. My issue with this card is, one, it has Bond, which isn't great, especially for US where healing is an issue. And two, it just costs 4. If this card cost 3, I would put this in frontline. And it costs 4. Now, obviously, not every card needs to be pushed. It's fine if there is a card in an expansion that comes out that is not good enough to see play in a competitive deck. That's fine. It's just very weird that these cards are so poorly costed and poorly statted. Well, like, you have cards like Mustang or Thunderbolt, and it's like, yeah, why would I play a 4-cost 3/4 that damages me to pick one of 3 cards when I can instead play a 3-cost 3/5 with Shock that draws cards that I intentionally put into my deck? Yeah, this is probably the most playable of these types of cards, just going off memory. But even then, I don't think you're playing this card in any remotely competitive deck. Then we get the German one of these develop guys. So the German one is a 5-credit 4/5 infantry with Bond and Shock. You could start to see a theme here. They have a health equal to their cost and they attack 1 less than their cost, and then they have Bond and a random combat keyword. In this, not random, but you know what I mean. In this case, it is a 5-cost 4/5 Bond Shock, and it has deployment, develop Eagle Claws, Sky Barons, or Tactical Strike. Now, this one is, I want to say it might be like more playable than the US one, because like you can reduce its cost to 4, obviously with the elite that we saw earlier, and at 4 cost Shock 4/5, not bad. Deployment, develop a card. Germany can sometimes lack for card draw, so like in some ways it's like a bigger Panzer 3H. Kind of, if you really squint at it. It's just the options on this one are kind of mediocre. Eagle Claws is incredibly situational, and most of the time is going to be bad. Sky Barons is, again, incredibly situational. Less situational than Eagle Claws, but it's fairly situational. And then Tactical Strike is just the one that you pick 90% of the time. However, Tactical Strike's not a great card anymore. It's been power crept to all hell. So the fact that Tactical Strike is the best thing you can pick off of this is very depressing. So yeah, I don't think that this one is going to be particularly good, to be completely honest with you. Then moving on, we have the British one, and the British breaks the trend of the stat trend. Instead of being a 6-cost 5/6 like the Soviet one, it is a 6-cost 3/7. So it actually has 1 less total stat point than the comparable card here. And this one has Bond Guard, so 6-credit 3/7 Guard. Pretty bad stats. It's worse stats than Seaforth for 2 less, and you don't take the damage. However, upside, you get to develop either a convoy, a fortification, or an interception. And this one is probably the best out of the develop options, despite these all being somewhat niche is the wrong word, but like fortification is not really seen any play, interception is definitely not seen any play, and convoy hasn't seen much play lately because there's just other ways to draw 2 cards in Britain for cheaper. So none of these cards necessarily are cards that you are going to put into your deck, but all 3 of them are cards that you like. They're all tech cards in a sort of way. So like fortification is 3-credit heal 7 is really, really good against decks where like it's incredible against decks that are trying to burn you out, which is not every deck, which is why you don't play fortification. But if you play a guy that can develop fortification specifically against those types of decks, then that's pretty good. Same with interception, where it's incredibly good against the types of decks that only run a few targeted orders. Looking at something like Burn with Bismarck. But obviously, there's decks that don't run targeted orders, or there's decks that run a lot of targeted orders, and then interception is just not going to get a ton of value. So being able to develop interception based on what your opponent is playing makes it a lot more valuable. And then convoy is just sort of the like, you don't need healing or interception, you just want card draw, you can pick a convoy and it's fine. So the develop pool on this one is the best, but again, it's just so slow. Um, like, man, this card is just so slow. Like, I don't know, I could see like British USA Timmy ramps picking this card, because it's just like substantially more expensive Glamour Boys. You play this and you pick Fortification every time in like a Timmy ramp deck. Um, but yeah, no, I think that this card is just simply too slow though for like any realistic competitive play. And then last but not least, we have the Japanese version of these cards. It is the 151st Infantry Regiment, limited rarity, a 3 credit 2/3. Also has Bond Shock like the German one. And it has deployment, develop Amphibious Assault, Expansion, or for Prosperity. Amphibious Assault is 3 credits, destroy a unit with 3 or less attack, and for Prosperity is 2 credits, give all of your Japanese units +1/+1. I'm just simply saying those ones because there's a pretty decent chance that people watching do not know what those cards do because they don't really see play. Yeah, this one, like, you can develop extra expansions. So, like, 3 credits develop an expansion is, like, I don't know. Is that good enough to play in Jagro? Probably. It's, like, similar to a Sherman. Sherman's 4 credits, draw 2 cards with a body. This is, like, 3 credits, pick expansion, draw 2 cards. With a body, now, obviously, the body is worse than Sherman. And also it requires you to have the front line. But, you know, you don't have to pick expansion. You can pick other stuff. So, like, I take back actually what I said. This one is probably going to see like play in certain Japan decks. It's just Japan has so many really, really good cards. This does not feel like a really good card. This feels like a fine card. Like this feels like a card that you would be happy to play in Jagro 4 years ago. But we are not living 4 years ago. We are living now, where there's just truly broken stuff for Japan to be doing almost every single turn. And I'm not convinced that this is one of them. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not super convinced that Japan needs this, especially because the other options on this are not particularly appealing. Like if the other options on this were like, say, like command failure or isolation or something, I don't know. Obviously, all of the cards here are orders from the base set, and neither of those two things I just said are from the base set. But just like if the two other orders you could develop off of this were more situationally playable, I suppose like for Prosperity in a Jagro deck, you're gonna have a lot of Japanese units. Sometimes you pick that for like a big AoE buff or something. I don't know, it's just a lot of credits. The bond on this doesn't matter at all, and the shock is just pure upside, but like 3 credits for a 2/3. It's just a lot of credits if you're not picking expansion, and if you are picking expansion, every time, then fair enough. But I'm just not convinced that you don't just play scouting parties and recons and Sasebo and 4 expansion, and that's not just enough draw with the Kagis and stuff. So you very well might see this. This is certainly the most playable out of them. I take back what I said about the US one. This is the only one that might see tournament play, followed probably by the German one, just because you can reduce the cost to 4. But yeah, I'm just not too impressed on this card. But I could very easily eat my words on this card. Like, this card could become like a 3 of staple in Japan for the rest of time. Maybe I'm just really off base on this card, and just developing an extra expansion is just that good on this body. I'm just trying to picture, like, I feel like Japan just has better things to do on turn 3 or turn 4. However, there's very well, like, if they ever power, like, they lower the power creep. Like, if they ever rotate the best cards in the set and then release an expansion that's not insane, and just try to lower the power level of the game, because we have seen Hearthstone, where power creep was crazy, but then the way they did rotation, they eventually did have periods of time after the crazy power creep where the game was less powerful than a previous point. That's not really been the case in Cards for a long time, basically since like the first or second rotation. We have not had a point where the preceding meta is less powerful than the previous meta. But if the meta ever does somehow become less powerful for Japan, this card obviously goes into Japan. And then one last card for the set to cap off Homefront, we have Second Front, which is a 4-credit German standard order bond on the card, and it has the text: remove a friendly unit, return it at the end of the next enemy turn, then duplicate it. And this is a very exciting card. This is a very exciting effect. Because one, you do theoretically get around countermeasures because it says end of enemy's turn, not start of your turn, which could theoretically be relevant. But then the other thing about this is there's some pretty cool combos you can do with this. The first one that comes to mind is Comet. If you just do something like Comet, attack with Comet, Second Front Comet, at the start of your next turn you get back 2 Comets on board, 0 op, 8 damage for free, effectively. However, Comet is rotated. I don't really see much use for this in Standard at the moment. Like, you can duplicate some big guys at the cost of temporarily losing the big guy, but, like, I feel like Germany would just rather have the big guy on board and then play a second big guy. So there's some very funny things you can do with this. If you take it out of Germany or like bring it in as German ally with other nations, maybe there's some stuff you could do with probably blitz planes and setting up like 2-turn lethals in Japan or maybe Britain or something like that. But like again, I just don't see that being better than just playing the broken stuff that's in the game currently and just playing more broken stuff each turn rather than trying to do combos to duplicate your broken stuff. So all in all, I don't think this card's that good, but it is fun and it's more interesting than the Polish stuff that we saw. So there's that. And that brings us to the end of Homefront. So those 87 cards dropping tomorrow. When you see this video, like on the day that you see this video, it's probably out already or coming out in a couple hours. And again, I will be streaming on the day that the expansion drops. On the day you see this video, I will be streaming in the afternoon EST, so evening European time, over on twitch.tv/jking7 or jking0739, link in the description. Let me know what you thought about this final batch of cards. This is where we sort of got some of the craziest cards shown to us here. Let me know if you think I missed anything, if you agree with me, you disagree with me. Are you excited for stuff? Are you scared about stuff? What is the first deck you are going to be building with Homefront? Let me know all of that down below. And there will be one final video coming out by the end of this week covering the balance patch. There is a small balance patch going out alongside Homefront, and as well as I will take that time to sort of cover my opinion on Homefront, the balance patch, and the rotation as a whole, in just a brief summary of my thoughts. But with that all being said, thank you very much for watching, guys. It's been a big day of recording for me, and I will see all of y'all tomorrow with Homefront.